In this video, I'm going to give a first impressions of playing the third-party DND5E campaign, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, in D&D Beyond. Specifically, I'm going to get into how I am playing it solo using all the tools available in D&D Beyond. A little bit of background. So I'm a watcher of the Dungeon Dudes on YouTube, and I'm familiar with their Drakkenehim product, but I've never really watched their streams, and I've never really given it much of a look at all. I actually am a pretty big fan of dark fantasy. I'm not so much into the more whimsical side of fantasy that we tend to see in a lot of campaigns. So I gave this one a shot because it really seemed up my alley. Again, I never really dug into it. I think the Kickstarter started back in June of 2021. I wasn't even playing Dungeons and Dragons at that time. I wasn't even playing any tabletop games prior to that, so this whole campaign kind of was off of my radar until it popped up into my D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond is my primary method for playing D&D. I've put together a little bit of a workflow that works for me and enables me to roll up a group of characters and essentially play through a campaign, primarily using the toolset provided by D&D Beyond. And I'm honestly glad I did. I did have a lot of fun with this, which we'll see more of that in this video. Going into Dungeons of Drakkenheim blind, I started reading the first few chapters, which provides an introduction to Drakkenheim, the factions in the campaign, some player character creation and personal quests, as well as general advice on how to run the campaign. This is a darker fantasy setting where a mysterious magical meteor has crashed into and destroyed the city of Drakkenheim. Ruins of the destroyed city is very spooky and filled with eldritch energies and abominations. A fog-like purple haze hangs in the ruins, which propagates many challenges, such as throngs of hostile undead to roam the city, not being able to long rest, and a contamination condition for anyone spending too much time in the ruins. The player characters and the various factions of Drakkenheim launch expeditions into the city ruins to retrieve valuables, conduct studies, or complete various faction-based objectives. The Dungeon Dudes mentioned they were inspired by Fallout New Vegas, but I get a very big vibe from video games like the Stalker series and the Roadside Picnic science fiction novel, Annihilation, the book and the movie, and even extraction shooters like Escape from Tarkov, where there's this concept of a zone where all sorts of phenomena occur and literally anything can or will kill you. Nature and the location itself is an antagonist in the story. The expeditions I mentioned are all launched from the nearby village of Emberwood, which is set up like a Wild West-like town where players and factions prep and launch their expeditions into the zone. This hub area of the adventure gives off a very strong Tristram-like vibe from Diablo and serves as the player's home between missions. The module does detail various merchants and services in the town to facilitate players gearing up and preparing for their various adventures into Drakkenheim. There are 5 factions in this campaign, each with their own detailed leaders, objectives, stronghold locations, missions that they can give to the players, and even what happens if the players get on their good or bad sides. In many cases, these factions are directly opposed to one another, so while I haven't played mid or late game yet, it seems like they will be in direct conflict soon. So far in my playthrough, I've only skimmed the top level details of the factions, and will dive into the details when I encounter them in my campaign play. That's just how I play solo. Alright, now it gets weird. Yes, I primarily play D&D solo. I do play group games, and I also run a few one-shots here and there with my coworkers, but I yearn for more. So I've taken to playing tabletop role-playing games solo. These days, it's probably my biggest hobby. It scratches a creative itch that I just don't get out of other video games or media. When I play solo, I enjoy playing a group of characters and prefer to use an existing campaign to form the basis of the action and the story. I do utilize random tables and resources such as the Mythic Game Master emulator. Still, even so, a pre-written campaign or scenario tends to be the primary driver of the story in my solo games. After picking a campaign module or scenario that interests me, I will roll up my characters, typically running with 2 to 5 characters. I will purposefully make choices that minimize the mental overhead when creating a new character. Running 4 distinct D&D characters with classes, features, and various abilities can quickly become difficult. So I try to avoid subclasses or features that add a disproportionate amount of mental overhead. For example, rolling a fighter that crits on a 19 or a 20 is much more manageable than a fighter subclass that includes a new mechanic like the superiority dice. Even so, things still get forgotten, but this is normal for players and groups managing just their own single character, so I really don't get too bent out of shape over it. I have tried a few dungeon delves with a single character, and every single time I get one-shot net 20'd by a monster on the first encounter. I'm just cursed. It doesn't work out. Just for fun, I wanted to show how I sometimes use a tarot deck to create characters. This method can be used for any tabletop game, and it's a fun creative exercise in its own right. Firstly, I obtain a tarot deck and draw any number of cards randomly. I find 1, 2, or 3 card draws work just fine. Your draw can help determine the character's background, class, motivations, or just kind of like a general vibe for the character. Things like drawing swords can represent a more martial class or character style, whereas wands could mean a more magic character. You can use the intended meanings behind the cards themselves, or just kind of go with the artwork or whatever you feel when you do the draw. While preparing for my Drakkenehim campaign, I did a 3-card draw from a deck to help develop some of my characters. So here's one that I came up with. Here on the left, we can see a tower, 3 of swords reversed, and a 5 of pentacles on the right. This is a pretty troubling draw, and it was a perfect match for a troubled character for my campaign. The first card, the Tower, this represents disaster and destruction, and for me, this was the meteor impacting Drakkenehim. I interpreted this to mean that the character was a survivor of the original event, and this perfectly matched one of the provided backgrounds in the module. The 3 of swords reversed in the center to me expressed the character's focus on pain, recovery, reconciliation, repressing emotions, things like that. And to me, I interpreted this as the events of Drakkenehim still weighing heavily on this character and even driving their actions. Likewise, finally, the card on the right here, the 5 of Pentacles, can represent poverty, adversity, isolation, worry. So I interpreted this as the character is troubled, and even going a little bit further and saying that they feel that in order to resolve these feelings, these issues they're having, they need to go back to Drakkenehim to find answers. Again, these ideas lined up perfectly with some of the various example Drakkenehim flavored player character backgrounds and personal character quests outlined in the module. So this worked out really well to help come up with some character ideas for the campaign. You'll probably find that not every draw will line up perfectly, and that's fine. You can always do a redraw, but tarot leaves enough room for interpretation and ideation that it's a useful tool for building RPG characters. So at this point, after coming up with some inspiration and character ideas, I'll go ahead and gather some art assets for the character and actually then go and create the character in D&D Beyond using their character creation tools. I'm a prolific user of Obsidian for my work and home life, and it's also a critical component for my solo RPG games. I don't really enjoy extensive journaling in my games, but I do document a high-level overview of the sessions. This serves as a basic party journal, as well as some light item, gold, and even quest tracking. I'll also copy-paste text blocks from the descriptions from D&D Beyond for the module into Obsidian for items that I feel like I'm going to want to reference later or reference quickly. I do create pages and folders for the various locations, characters, and factions for my game worlds, I also actively link between these notes in Obsidian because this enables some quick reference and the graph view, which is fun to look at and see how all the various world elements link together. Over time, I've been linking my various games together across Forgotten Realms and my own homebrew settings. Also in Obsidian, I'm experimenting with the newer Canvas feature to help provide additional digital workspaces and easy access to things like PDF or other resources that I use in my games. The Dice Roller Community add-on is actually pretty decent, especially if I need to make general rolls for all characters or just a large number of rolls quickly. This is actually a pretty common event in the Drakkenehim campaign, as you'll typically have a character roll a d20 for each hour when traveling the ruins. If one or more character rolls a 1, it's time for a random event, and this is much easier to do in Obsidian than it would be to do, for example, in D&D Beyond. Something new I've been testing out is actually copying your campaigns out of D&D Beyond and into Obsidian. The formatting when you do a copy paste directly out of D&D Beyond's website into an Obsidian notebook actually works pretty flawlessly. It just works. So in a couple of minutes, you could theoretically copy paste out your entire campaign sourcebook into a local Obsidian notebook. Again, the images, the tables, bullet points, tables, the formatting just copy pastes perfectly. You have to do a few tweaks to make it look perfect, but this might be a good option for those looking to have fewer browser tabs open while playing online. There is a website called Obsidian TTRPG tutorials.com, which has a lot more information about this. So we have some character ideas and we've picked a campaign out. In this case, we have the Drakkenehim module and our Drakkenehim flavored characters. We've got our notes app ready to go and our campaign is open. What's next? At this point, I will open the campaign to the point where the DM would first start playing with their players and basically keep reading. At this point, I'm essentially taking turns playing the role of DM and the role of the players. So I will literally go to the first chapter of play, read top down, and then when it's at a point where the characters need to take actions, I will play that action out as the role of the characters, going back and forth and rinse and repeat until we get through a play session. So let's do this. Let's actually use some of the chapters from the campaign as an example. The starting the campaign chapter has some social suggestions for getting the game started, but let's actually jump into the prelude section called The Road to Drakkenheim. In this introduction, the characters are heading towards Drakkenheim for the first time. They are accompanying a supply caravan bound for Emberwood Village, which is, again, the campaign's hub area. Erwin Marlowe, a human commoner, has hired the party to guard the caravan after the last group they had bailed out at the last second. Various events will happen along the road, including an encounter where the bandits try and shake down the players for their cash and valuables. The book provides various examples of how this encounter can go down, such as negotiating your way out or even taking a combat approach. In this situation, I'd interpret how the party would react based on their character traits and maybe some social skill or random die rolls and things like that. In my game, this encounter resulted in a fight. So let me show you how I use the D&D Beyond Maps tools and the encounter tracker to facilitate this combat event. Basically, what I'm looking at here is I have my browser open. I'm not going to be showing my note sheet. I'm just going to be showing everything that I'm doing to actually play the game using D&D Beyond. So, like I mentioned, I'm in the Road to Drakkenheim campaign, and I would start by reading through this. At this point, it's basically describing the characters and some of the action that's leading them up to this events on the road. So this will describe where, hey, we have this bandit shakedown happens. It talks about the leader of the bandits, where they are, what their demands are. And then again, here are some sections where it describes what could happen in this encounter. And this is it. This is just one section here that describes this, but from here you can go off and basically run the encounter. So like I said, in my case, This resulted in a combat scenario. So I go into the maps tool. I add my party. I have my 4 characters here. We have the NPC here. The maps tool doesn't have a way to add just free tiles, so I don't have like extra characters or like carts and things like that. It's very simple. So we have our bandits here at the top. We have our party here. I would at this point go into my characters sheets. Maybe some of these characters, they're going to do persuasion rolls. In this case, maybe someone's going to do intimidation. We'll just figure out how the characters would react to this. And in my game, again, like I mentioned, this ended up in combat. So I would use the DndBeyond VTT here. It has all the ranges, it has the basics. I can move the tokens around and do all that. The nice thing, again, about the maps tool is any monster that you own in a source book in D&D Beyond is available here, which includes some of the Drakkenehim characters, of course. So if I wanted all my spooky Drakkenehim monsters, they're all here for me. Likewise, just the things in the monster manual and things like that are also here too. So I can add all the bandits I want to this. And again, the trick here is because I own those in D&D Beyond, I can basically recreate this in the encounter builder, which I've done here. So I have this road encounter that I've set up with bandits. I threw the NPC in there as well. This is tagged for the party that I'm running the campaign with. And then here I can see in the tracker, I have my player characters and monsters as well. Now, a lot of folks complain about how initiative really slows down D&D, which is actually why I really like this auto roll initiative button here. If I really felt like rolling, I could do that. I could roll on the physical tabletop, or I could roll in my character sheets here. But the auto roll, especially for the monsters, if you have a large group, saves a ton of time. And I can just hit start. And now the initiative tracker is set up. And of course, in D&D Beyond, you have access to the stat sheets as well. I can go ahead and I can roll the various attacks, saving throws, and all that right from the encounter tracker. So at this point, to run a combat scenario, I'm more or less switching back and forth between all these tabs here at the top. It's a lot of tab switching, but once you get used to it, it's a pretty decent flow. So I would be here on the battle map. Say this is Bandit D. I can see, yep, he can move 30 feet. So I'll have him go right up here to this character. Bandit D can go ahead and do an attack here. He rolls an 18. I can see he's attacking this character who has an AC of 17. Great. We can go ahead and roll the damage for that. 5 points of damage. I would go into the character sheet, apply 5 points of damage, and then boom, we're on to the next round of initiative. In this case, it's a player character. So because D&D Beyond does all the player character math for you, it's very likely that I'd come in here, he'd use the Warhammer. Great, that's a hit with a 23. I can see the bandit's AC here is only 12. Great, so we confirm that's a hit. I'm going to roll damage, 7 points of damage, all good. I come back to the encounter tracker, apply the damage. Often I go back to the character sheet and I think to myself, do they have a bonus action they want to use? Are they going to use any of the remaining movement? If not, their turn is done. I move on to the next character. And really just rinse and repeat. If you've run combat before in D&D, this should all be very familiar to you. But again, the encounter tracker more or less manages a lot of the turns and things like that for you. It has easy access to the stat blocks, which is very nice. And then more or less we keep running through the rounds until the combat is resolved. Again, tends to be a lot of tab switching, but once you've done it a few times, it can be pretty efficient. At this point, I would then jump back to the campaign right where I left off, and I would more or less keep on scrolling. So this actually does mention, I believe it mentions in here in the development section that, hey, they have a camp out somewhere and you can either play that, Does your party want to go investigate the camp and get revenge or do something to these bandits? Yes or no? You can go ahead and play that. In my game, that did not happen. So I then just scroll down past that section, and now it talks about what happens that night later on the road. There's another kind of spooky encounter that happens that night when you're camping on the road. So again, more or less popping between the campaign module itself, the maps, and if necessary for things like combat, we jump right into the encounter builder. Through this gameplay loop, I will also try and mix in some random tables or adding elements from systems like the Mythic Game Master emulator, just to spice things up and add some, maybe even call it light roleplay to the session. I find that even though, again, we're moving between a lot of browser tabs and switching between apps and tools, after about 20 minutes or so, I can kind of get into a creative flow state where I'm not really even so aware of all these digital tools sitting on the screen in front of me, but instead I have that feeling of being transported into a different world, that special feeling that you can really only get from tabletop role-playing games. So as we close into the end of the video here, I want to give my feedback for some of the D&D Beyond tools. So first off, the D&D Beyond map tool. My initial impression is it's good. It's very, very simple. There's not a ton of detailed complexity in the tool sets right now, but I feel like that is somewhat of a strength. It reminds me much of the earlier iterations of the excellent Albert Rodeo VTT. It's very similar in many respects. It's simple, it's lightweight, and it just works. One of the other biggest things about the D&D Beyond maps is the fact that if you own the module, you can place the tokens. It's already created all of those things for you. There are some downsides to this, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but otherwise, if you already own the content in D&D Beyond, it's very easy to get up and running, and they're going through and adding maps for existing campaigns that you may already own, which is great. You don't have things like spell effect template measurements. That would be nice. Right now, I just kind of wing it. If there's like a cone of fire that's 15 feet wide, you just kind of have to eyeball it. If you want a dedicated condition tracker, you won't find that either. So you can color character rings around the character tokens, but there's no dedicated tracker. So if someone's prone, you might use a particular color. If someone's on fire, you might use a red border for the token. But otherwise, you do have to kind of track that on your own in your head, which is a little problematic. I hope they add a condition tracker eventually. And while I mentioned earlier the 0 effort for tokens for your owned monsters is great, but I wish you could provide an override for the token art for official sources. So you might have seen earlier I had these bandits and they just have a generic silhouette. I think it'd be great if I could apply my own token to these official characters, because the only other way to get art is to homebrew your own monsters in D&D Beyond. This was a problem for me in the Drakkenehim campaign as well, which I'll talk about later. But in many cases, like maybe I don't like the zombie art, or maybe I don't like really any of the token art in the game, or I want to flavor it for the campaign I'm playing. Being able to override that art would be a huge feature, especially for people who really like to play visually with their maps. Not everyone just wants a bunch of generic silhouettes cluttering up the map. They'd like some nice token art. The next thing here is how maps and the encounter tracker don't play together. So like I said, there is no real integration there. It would be amazing if I could select, if I had a selection box on the map tool that I could use to add the tokens that are currently on the field in my map to an encounter. This would save a ton of time, because currently in your campaign, if you have an encounter, you have to set up the map and then you have to set up the encounter separately. Hopefully those two will be integrated. I mean, the monsters that are used in the map are the same that are used in the encounter. So there should be a mechanism that they could build out to link those two together. That would save a ton of time, and it'd be a great integration to have. I really hope they add that soon. Since I'm talking about the map tool so much, I just wanted to say that I am a big fan of Foundry VTT. I have a lot of experience with that tool. I've run a lot of games with Foundry, and I love its near infinite options and incredible community add-on ecosystem. But I have to say, I'd probably have to spend a dozen or so hours setting up the campaign before I could play and immerse myself in it. Currently, the Drakkenehim campaign in D&D Beyond has to be the best way to dive right in and start playing with digital tools. Now, apparently, this campaign is also being released as a VTT module soon. Again, I wasn't part of the Kickstarter, but apparently this was part of it. So if someone is actually out there building out a module to have all this campaign information, have all the tokens, the monsters, the maps in Foundry, that might be also a very excellent way to play. So now some feedback for playing Dungeons of Drakkenheim and D&D Beyond. In an online video review, I heard some negative feedback about how this book was organized, in so that it wasn't organized well. I found the organization, especially for my playstyle, to be excellent. To me, it reads very top down. I don't need to read the module cover to cover to actually play it. For example, in the Wizards of the Coast module Curse of Strahd, I feel like I really have to read the entire book cover to cover and spoil the story for myself before I would actually really be able to play it. In contrast, I'm about a quarter of the way through the Drakkenehim campaign and about maybe 15 to 20 hours of solo play, and I've had no spoilers for the endgame content. I'm learning about the world, the characters, and the factions, and uncovering the mysteries as my player characters experience them. And this is all just by reading along, acting it out, doing the player actions, and playing the actual campaign. For me, this is my single biggest compliment, single biggest plus that I have for the campaign, and I would actually strongly recommend it for folks who enjoy solo gaming or would be interested in trying it. Now, some implementation feedback for the campaign in D&D Beyond. I really wish important NPCs had their own stat blocks with art and not just generic mage. An example of this would be River, who is one of the lieutenants for the Amethyst Academy faction. This character has a wonderful page with art and all these details and role-playing tips, but their stat block is just, I believe, generic mage. And this is fine for people running the games at a traditional table. This is perfect. There's no issues here. But in D&D Beyond, it would be nice to be able to use this character, River, in encounters and on the maps. You really can't do that today because this monster, this token, does not exist. You just pick mage and then you get a generic silhouette showing up on your encounter tracker and on your map. It would be great if instead, even if they use the basic mage's stats, to have this in D&D Beyond. On a related note, some of the monsters in the campaign, such as the Haze Husk, which is more or less like a Drakkenheim themed zombie, which is something you're going to be running into very, very early in the campaign. It doesn't have any art for the stat block. It just has kind of like a generic silhouette thing. But again, just being able to have some nice token artwork for this common monster would go a long way. Because right now, when I play and I run into these things, I just kind of get a generic looking token. Again, it's not a showstopper. It doesn't ruin the fun or anything. It's a nice to have. Now, one other issue I had, which has since been fixed, was some missing inventory objects. In my playthrough, there is this Scepter of Saint Vitruvio, which is detailed in the campaign module. It has its own page. It has item stats and all that. But I couldn't actually find it for my character, so I had to homebrew this to use in my game because I actually wanted to temporarily have a character using this. This just seems to have been a bug or minor oversight because since I last played, they've actually added this back. So it is good to see that I think they're taking feedbacks or they're resolving some bugs that they had in the implementation. So this is just nice to see. All right, so in conclusion, I'm having a lot of fun with this campaign. I do feel like I've really gotten my money's worth out of this module in D&D Beyond, and I wanted to get this video out before I continue my campaign, but maybe there will be a chance I provide a mid-campaign or end campaign update if it strikes my fancy. But so far, I'm having a lot of fun, and I'm excited to jump back into it as soon as I get this video uploaded. Something I wanted to mention too is with the Hasbro layoffs affecting the D&D Beyond staff and being part of a mega corporation myself, I'm a bit uneasy paying a monthly fee to the cruel corporate machine for my hobby. That being said, D&D Beyond is still probably, it has to be the best resource for playing D&D digitally and playing it with ease. It really does a really good job of getting me right into the game with the least amount of prep. If it's just all there, ready for me to go, I can jump in just minutes and actually be playing. And that is a huge plus. So with all that, a big thanks to Ghostfire, the Dungeon Dudes, for making this wonderful campaign, and to all the fine folks at D&D Beyond, especially the ones who got laid off recently. I hope you're all doing well and you land on your feet.